Siege warfare. This refers to the long and methodical military strategy of surrounding a fortified location such as a city, castle, or stronghold in order to isolate it completely from outside support. Throughout history, sieges could last for months or even years, depending on the strength of the defenses and the supplies stored inside. Armies outside the walls would cut off food, water, and communication, slowly applying pressure without always engaging in direct combat. Defenders, on the other hand, relied on stockpiled resources, reinforced walls, and occasional counterattacks. The outcome often depended less on battlefield skill and more on endurance, logistics, and patience. Over time, siege warfare became a test of who could outlast the other side, with civilians often suffering the most as shortages and disease spread inside the trapped settlement. Scorched earth tactics. This is the deliberate destruction of anything that might be useful to an advancing enemy, including crops, livestock, buildings, and infrastructure. It has been used throughout history as a defensive strategy during retreats or invasions, where holding ground is no longer possible. By removing all available resources, the retreating force ensures that the enemy must rely entirely on long and vulnerable supply lines. This often slows down invasions and weakens the attacking army over time. However, the tactic also comes with severe consequences for local populations, as entire regions can be left uninhabitable or economically ruined. In many historical cases, scorched earth policies shaped the outcome of campaigns not through direct battles, but through starvation, exhaustion, and the sheer difficulty of maintaining an army in a barren landscape. Guerrilla warfare. This form of warfare relies on small, highly mobile groups using surprise attacks, sabotage, and hit-and-run tactics against larger and more traditional military forces. It is especially effective in difficult terrain such as forests, mountains, or urban environments, where conventional armies struggle to maintain control. Instead of engaging in open battles, guerrilla fighters aim to disrupt supply lines, ambush patrols, and gradually wear down the enemy's strength and morale. Historically, this method has been used by resistance movements and local populations fighting occupying forces. Its effectiveness comes from unpredictability and intimate knowledge of the environment, which allows smaller groups to avoid direct confrontation. Over time, guerrilla warfare has often forced larger armies to adapt their strategies, as holding territory becomes far more challenging when the enemy can strike at any time and disappear just as quickly. Psychological warfare. This involves using fear, deception, and manipulation to weaken an enemy's mental state and decision-making ability without relying solely on physical combat. Throughout history, armies have used loud noises, exaggerated displays of force, misinformation, and symbolic intimidation to create confusion and panic. The goal is to break the opponent's morale so that resistance becomes less effective even before major battles begin. In some cases, rumors about overwhelming numbers or brutal consequences were spread deliberately to discourage resistance. Psychological warfare can also target leadership, creating distrust and hesitation within command structures. Over time, these techniques became more organized, especially with the development of propaganda systems. The core idea remains the same: if the enemy believes they are already defeated, actual fighting becomes far less necessary. Ambush tactics. This refers to surprise attacks launched from hidden or concealed positions against an unsuspecting enemy force. It has been used since ancient times in almost every type of warfare, particularly in environments that allow stealth and concealment such as dense forests, narrow mountain passes, or urban terrain. The attacking force carefully chooses timing and location to maximize confusion and damage before the enemy has time to react. Once the strike is made, the attackers often withdraw quickly to avoid prolonged engagement. The success of an ambush depends heavily on planning, discipline, and knowledge of enemy movement patterns. Historically, ambushes have been used not only to defeat enemy units but also to disrupt supply convoys and communication routes. Because they rely on surprise, even a smaller force can inflict significant losses on a much larger opponent under the right conditions. Naval blockade. This is a military strategy in which naval forces are used to prevent ships from entering or leaving enemy ports, effectively cutting off trade, supplies, and reinforcements by sea. It has played a major role in conflicts where controlling maritime routes was just as important as winning land battles. Over time, blockades can severely weaken a nation's economy and limit its ability to sustain military operations. Unlike direct combat, the pressure builds gradually as shortages of food, fuel, and materials begin to affect both civilians and soldiers. Blockades require strong naval presence and constant monitoring of large areas of water, making them resource-intensive but highly effective when maintained. Historically, they have been used to force political or military concessions without large-scale invasions. Attrition warfare. This strategy focuses on gradually wearing down an enemy by continuously inflicting losses in personnel, equipment, and morale rather than achieving a quick and decisive victory. It often emerges in conflicts where both sides are relatively evenly matched and neither can secure a fast breakthrough. Battles become repetitive and costly, with small gains measured against significant losses. The key idea is endurance, where victory goes to the side that can sustain its resources and manpower for a longer period. Historically, attrition warfare has led to some of the longest and most destructive conflicts, as both sides continue fighting even when territorial changes are minimal. Civilian populations and industrial capacity often become central to the outcome, as the ability to replace losses determines long-term survival. Feigned retreat. This is a deceptive battlefield maneuver where a force pretends to flee in order to lure pursuing enemies into a vulnerable position. Once the enemy breaks formation and commits to the pursuit, the retreating force suddenly turns and counterattacks. This tactic relies heavily on discipline, timing, and the expectation that the enemy will overextend themselves. It has been famously used by cavalry-based armies and steppe warriors who excelled in mobility and coordination. When executed correctly, it can turn a seemingly losing situation into a decisive victory. However, if the deception is discovered too early, the tactic can fail and lead to a real retreat. Its effectiveness depends on controlling both perception and movement on the battlefield. Trench warfare. This refers to a style of combat where opposing armies dig extensive networks of trenches to protect themselves from enemy fire and hold defensive positions over long periods. It became especially prominent during large industrial wars, where advances in weaponry made open battlefield movement extremely dangerous. Soldiers lived in harsh conditions within these trenches, facing mud, disease, cold, and constant threat of artillery fire. Battles often resulted in minimal territorial gain despite enormous casualties, as each side struggled to break through heavily fortified defensive lines. The nature of trench warfare turned conflict into a prolonged struggle of endurance, engineering, and supply management rather than fast-moving battlefield maneuvers. It fundamentally changed how wars were fought on a large scale. Chemical warfare. This involves the use of toxic substances such as gases or chemical agents to harm or incapacitate enemy forces. It was introduced on a large scale during major 20th century conflicts and quickly became known for its unpredictable and devastating effects. Unlike conventional weapons, chemical agents can spread through air and linger in the environment, affecting both soldiers and civilians. The psychological impact was also significant, as the invisible nature of the threat created widespread fear and confusion on the battlefield. Protective measures eventually improved, but early use caused severe suffering and long-term health consequences. Due to its humanitarian impact and inability to distinguish between combatants and non-combatants, chemical warfare has since been heavily restricted under international agreements.